We are back with another episode in our series, kind of focusing around youth and high school performance, nutrition, and recovery, and everything else that can go into it in our collaboration with Rising Athletes and Rusty Murphy, who is back asking questions about nutrition, particularly as it relates to high schoolers, but also getting down below. So really the focus on this episode is that, but our very own Dr. Andrew Jagim, with his background in nutrition research and just general nutrition knowledge, really gives some practical good takeaways that are super helpful, and really focuses just on the nutrition part. And we highlight that in this. We will do a whole other thing on supplementation, but really it all starts here, and that is why we put such a focus on it and with the importance of it all. So that's ultimately what you'll catch from this episode. With that, if you go to clinicallypress.org/shop, we have a nutrition references section of the shop that all are free. You just have to enter in a little bit of information, basically name and email, to download them. There is no cost. You don't have to put any payment information in, so please don't get surprised by that. I promise there is no payment information taken to even accidentally send you a bill. So with that, we will get into this episode. Lots to take away, great information, super practical things that you can implement right away with some flexibility depending on the situation that you find yourself in with your youth athlete or high school athlete. So please enjoy this episode, and we'll keep these series coming out as we get them recorded. Enjoy. Well, welcome to this episode of Clinically Pressed. We are back on with Rusty Murphy and also have Andrew Jagim, or AJ, joining us for this one. This is going to be another part of our series, just kind of talking about everything with performance and nutrition and recovery and injury. And we're really focusing today on training nutrition, kind of performance nutrition. And we're really going to focus on whole foods, like actual eating, and whatnot. And then we will do a follow-up on supplementation and talking about that specifically. It was just too much to cram into one episode as it gets to it. So like we did on last one, which hopefully you checked out on training, we're going to turn it over to Rusty, who's got a ton of questions. I will defer mostly to AJ on this one, since this is his wheelhouse, but provide some context if it's necessary, and we'll go from there. So Rusty.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. So in regards to, just general nutrition and performance, when you're an athlete of a sport, one of the main things, especially during off seasons, that a lot of coaches and players like to dive into is weight fluctuations, whether it's putting on weight. I think of my entire football career when I was in middle school until, my middle of college was, getting to the right weight to play at, whether it was putting on muscle, putting on weight, so I could deal with 300-pound O lineman, or maybe it's an O lineman that's too big and can't move quite as well at that weight, and decreasing that. So first question is, how do you align your nutrition goals, whether it's off season, in season, what have you, with your ultimate goal of getting to a weight or that's optimal for playing? And maybe just that, if you could provide some color on how to do that in the most efficient way and safe way, because you can you can balloon really fast, and you can not eat for 2 weeks, and you can lose a lot of weight that fast too. But maybe just provide some color on kind of the safest and best way to go about those things, and maybe a duration. Maybe it's not one off season you can't achieve that goal in. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it there and open the floor.
Yep, that sounds good. And so anytime we talk about kind of weight management strategies, whether we're going up or down, a lot of it will come down to A, which direction you're trying to go. And then B, once that's established, then you can kind of determine how many calories are needed to accomplish that goal. Because when it comes to weight change, energy intake is the primary driver to whichever way you're going. Meaning, if you eat extra calories throughout the day or consuming more than you're burning over the course of kind of a 24-hour period, that's how we gain weight. And then vice versa. If you're in a calorie deficit or if you're under eating, kind of based on your activity levels, over time, that can lead to weight loss. And as you alluded to in kind of the intro, people may have different goals depending on the phase of the season. And so it, let's say we're focused on an off-season period. Let's say the goal is weight gain. They're trying to put on muscle through an off-season strength conditioning program. Really, we have to kind of determine what that, maybe even starting at a maintenance calorie goal is, or figuring out what that's going to be. There's a lot of ways that we can get pretty sophisticated and really kind of drill down and find that exact number, or we can give kind of ballpark ranges and then do a little bit of trial and error and kind of fine tuning from there out. In most sport settings, we kind of follow the latter approach. And so usually that's going to be about 15 to 18 calories per pound is kind of a ballpark way to estimate how many kind of target calories an athlete is likely going to need. And that should put them somewhere in kind of a maintenance calorie goal where they would probably be maintaining weight, kind of based on that kind of calorie intake. Obviously, it's going to be very dependent on how active they really are. So if they're doing maybe like a morning lift, but then like skills practice in the afternoon, let's say they're mowing lawns in the summer, to pay the bills for their off-season stuff, that could be a pretty highly active day. And so they may be on that 18 calorie per pound end of that spectrum. And maybe after 3 weeks of eating that amount and training or kind of being at that activity level, they find my weight's not even budging. I'm not even gaining a pound. Okay, well, then we know we got to bump that up because they're just more active than the typical person. And so one of the other things you alluded to as well is we don't necessarily want to just balloon up and put on 30 pounds in a month or 2 month span. We want to make sure that weight we're putting on is kind of good weight, for a lack of better terms, primarily lean body mass is usually the goal for most athletes, with the exception of maybe that offensive lineman that the coach just says, we need you bigger. I don't care what kind of weight it is, just
Right.
get bigger before a season starts. But the reason why that's kind of important is you really only need about 500 extra calories a day to help, promote those increases in lean body mass. So that should lead to, a weight gain of maybe upwards to 3 pounds a week at that kind of rate. And that's kind of what you want to aim for as an athlete. If you find that you're putting on substantially more than that, the risk of adding excess body fat is just going to get that much higher. And again, for most people, that's probably not the goal that they want to do, or not the outcome they're looking for is gaining extra body fat. So kind of reiterating, then you find your maintenance calories, and then if the goal is weight gain, then we add about 500 calories to that. And then from there, it might be a bit of self-monitoring. So not that I'm a huge fan of daily weight checks. It kind of is a slippery slope when you have people getting on scales every day to monitor things. But once a week or something may be a good way to kind of just monitor where you're at. And then you're looking at more of the monthly trends, kind of when you put everything together. And ideally, we'd want kind of a steady increase in body weight over the course of like a 12-week off-season strength conditioning program, where maybe at the end of that, they've put on 12 pounds, over the course of a summer or something like that. I think is pretty reasonable and what you'd want to aim for. But then again, going back to that self-monitoring aspect, if they're not gaining that weight, or if they have gone the reverse direction, then we just know we need to keep adding in extra calories. And again, not that we want to add 2,000 extra calories today. I would still aim for 500 calorie increases, from like week to week. And that could be as simple as an extra smoothie or something like that you're eating before bed. Just milk, peanut butter, some fruit, maybe a scoop of protein powder or oatmeal or something like that in there. That's easily going to give you that extra 300, 500 calories that would likely be needed to help kind of promote that weight gain and again, hopefully increase in lean body mass.
Awesome. And I guess, do you recommend getting to maybe a target weight before a season starts, for example. Because I know like if you put on, let's say 10 pounds, for example, you want to be able to move at that 10 pounds. Is there an ideal time to kind of get there or maybe go a little bit past it? Like for us, we always wanted to go past, 3, 4 pounds before we got to August because we knew, in summer camp we were going to shed probably 3 or 4 pounds. Um, is there a time that maybe throughout their cycle, it's kind of harder for high school athletes that they're playing multiple sports, but getting to that optimum weight, whether it's loss or gain, so they can learn how to move at that weight?
Yeah, I would, just as you said, I would try to recommend getting there, and if anything, a few pounds over before the start of the season or before preseason, just because it's a real uphill battle to add weight during season. If anything, most people are losing weight, losing a little bit of muscle, and you're doing everything you can to just minimize that throughout the season. Like if you look at most strength programming, you kind of enter that in-season maintenance phase where you kind of just hit it with 1 to 2 strength workouts a week with the goal of let's just maintain everything we built up in the off season. And I would add kind of body weight and muscle mass into that equation as well. So add up as much as you can before the season starts. Although, like you said, you don't want to go too far above where now you come in slow and lethargic and kind of out of shape or deconditioned. So it's kind of finding that happy medium of what's the biggest and most muscular we can get before the season starts, yet still maintaining speed, agility, power, and some of those kind of physical attributes, knowing that you're likely going to lose it throughout the season. And then if we even kind of flip that and look at weight loss, again, if the goal, let's say going back to the coach saying, hey, we'd like you to be about 15 pounds lighter before season starts so that you can, move to outside linebacker or something. We need you just quicker and more agile. I would highly recommend doing that in the off season as much as possible, because going back to what I said earlier, if the goal is losing weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit, meaning you're under eating based on what your activity level is dictating. And sometimes that can be a stressful situation for the body because you're not getting enough food to support your body weight, which is what we're trying to do. We want you to lose weight and become a smaller athlete. But if you're trying to do that in season, sometimes that can be problematic because it's a hard balance to find where you're facilitating that weight loss, yet not shortchanging their nutrients and the energy they need to recover from the rigors of a season. So if possible, you really want to focus on that weight loss and kind of rebody composition type of goal in the off season as much as possible.
Gotcha.
And I think that complements everything we talked about last week, with the gradual, and this is why we always work so well together, AJ. Not that I paid you at all to say everything that complement it, but just everything you said, that steady increase in weight, which is also basically going along with your training in the off season. So your body is able to adapt to it. It isn't this big shock to the system. And then I thought, we talked really the same thing about what you just said, is maintaining as much strength as you can throughout the season. And again, just maintaining that weight, and the challenge that comes with that. That's not easy. When you look at 4 to 5 practices a week plus a game, throwing in a couple of lifting sessions, that's a lot of expenditure. And so understanding that it's hard to keep going up all the time, and sometimes that's not the goal, and that's okay based on where you're at and what you're doing. I think it's just something to always keep in mind with it. And fluctuations happen as long as you're getting back to that steady state, which I think again goes to AJ's point. Daily might be tough because if you didn't drink enough water the day before, it's going to show up on the scale.
Yeah.
If you over drink water, it will also show up on the scale. So that kind of weekly, if you're seeing a good trend week to week, I think is a really safe way, to make sure that you're not overly going. And if you start seeing anything in a direction over 3, 4 weeks time, that's when you can start addressing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an athlete over 200 pounds, it's very likely your weight will fluctuate 4 to 6 pounds within a day or day to day. And it's mostly driven by fluid intake, food residue in the gut, and maybe water retention and things like that. That's likely what's leading to pound differences here and there. It's again those trends that really tell more of the story. So don't freak out one way or the other. If you put on 2 pounds, it's like, well, you could have just had a big pancake breakfast and you're just fully glycogen loaded and retaining some fluid. That's all that is. You didn't put on 2 pounds of fat from
Yeah.
breakfast till now.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way in college. It was like, man, I swear it was 5 pounds different yesterday. And, you learn that that's pretty normal. So
Even what you guys would lose in practice, you guys will easily lose 3 pounds in a practice, if not more, on a hot day in August. So
yeah, I mean, you're outside, literally sweating from once you step out of even in the locker room sometimes, and then getting back, you're not stopping sweating for, probably 3.5, 4 hours. So yeah, it's a lot. The fluids are very much needed. But staying on this, some of the stuff I have, easily swayed high school athletes in mind. What can you put maybe some numbers or maybe just some color into what a normal off season of adding muscle looks like? I think there's some misconceptions that you can just go put on 20 pounds of lean muscle mass in an off season. And some people, some athletes attribute that to they put on 30 pounds, half has to be muscle, right? So what's a healthy amount and maybe a realistic amount of muscle that you can gain or lose in an off season, depending on how you're eating, how you're training, to just make sure that, there's realistic expectations. Cause I think a lot today, especially at the high school level is, they want to be, college athletes, they want to go the distance and they want to put on muscle mass. But I think some of the expectations are unrealistic at least from my experience in off seasons. And I don't want to put any numbers to it because I'll probably be wrong. But, for me, putting on a couple of pounds, 2 or 3 pounds of lean muscle was like a very good off season. So maybe you could add some more to that.
yeah, Joel and I have kind of joked about this every once in a while. I'll see people post things online about just that, like, oh, I put on 30 pounds in this 8-week program. And when I see that, my first thought is, well, you're clearly not using an appropriate tool to accurately measure body composition. And then my second thought was you probably didn't standardize your pre-testing situation where one was fasted, the other one was fed, one was dehydrated, the other not. And so those things are most likely going to explain the majority of that change in muscle mass from one time point to the other.
Same thing with weight loss.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
hard to lose 10% of your body fat in 6 weeks. Like that's not really a thing.
Yeah.
You just lose all your
yeah.
And again, it comes back to swaying the test. It's easy to sway some of those tests that people use. And so again, it's not a reliable way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, even what we use in the clinic is a DEXA scanner, which is a very accurate way to measure body composition. But if I did it now fasted and then I went and ate 6 pounds of pancakes and came back, that machine's going to read that as lean body mass because I store that within muscle tissue and it gets kind of calculated that way with the software. And so, again, that's not really me putting on muscle mass. That's just me glycogen loading from pancake feeding. And so again, there's a lot that goes into accurate body composition measurement. It gets a little trickier with high schoolers because some of those kids are growing naturally anyway. So I've seen kids put on 20 pounds, maybe in 6 months, but they could have hit a major growth spurt and they shot up 3 inches in height. And so they were just kind of filling out for their frame. So honestly, I don't even know what like a realistic number would look like for a 16-year-old because again the puberty and some of that stuff that comes into play is such a wild card. But for someone, let's say they're 17, they've already kind of gone through the majority of their kind of puberty growth and development. I think putting on 3 to 6 pounds maybe is somewhat reasonable and like a longer off season strength training program. If again they were really training at a high level and keeping up with the eating, I think is going to be the biggest driver there because the newer you are to training, and I would classify a 17-year-old as a new trainee in the grand scheme of things, they can put on lean body mass quicker than people who have been lifting for 20 years, just because they get a lot of those kind of newbie gains. And they're very sensitive to some of that anabolic signaling, and can really put on lean muscle fairly quickly, or quicker than people who are more advanced trainees can. But again, they got to eat a lot to really drive that growth and increase in lean body mass. So again, we're still talking single digit increases in muscle here in like an off-season program. No way are people putting on 20, 30 pounds in muscle. They may put on 20 pounds a year, but again, I would attribute a lot of that to the natural growth and development of being a teenager. And then sure, they could be putting on some muscle through the training as well, but no one at that age is putting on 20, 30 pounds in a summer strength program.
Right. So I wanted to stay on that because you touched on this, but simply eating, and I'm learning the more and more I'm digging into my own coaching system, is that high schoolers especially don't know like the importance of getting enough food throughout the day.
College athletes don't either for the most part.
Yeah.
At least not in my experience.
Yeah, it's kind of a thing where, I don't know if it's they think they're gonna, put on too much weight by eating, or, they want the six pack showing if they have it naturally, that kind of thing. But could you just talk to the importance of, and maybe some tips to, eating throughout the day and making sure you're getting enough calories? Because I think every kid should have like a MyFitnessPal calorie tracker just to understand how much they're getting. But maybe give out some good meals that you've seen work. I think of like a multi-athlete sport or multi-sport athlete, that has a couple practices a week and maybe 2 games or events, because they're undoubtedly losing weight on accident. So maybe provide, I don't know, some tips, tricks, how many meals throughout the day, what type of meals, what to make sure you're getting, maybe, hopefully not like McDonald's fries for all of them and things like that.
Yeah, honestly, I think high school athletes have it the hardest when it comes to kind of fueling the athlete, just because of their schedule. They're at school the majority of the day. Not all schools are big fans of kids walking around with food or having snacks in the classroom. And so you really got to be a little bit more strategic, I think, at that level of taking advantage of breakfast first and foremost. We're kind of battling that in our house right now. Our oldest isn't a big, she's not hungry in the morning, and so we have to find ways to try to get something in her, before school. And I was even talking to Joel about this the other day. What we've done for her, and I've done this for other athletes, is just backload the calories before you go to bed then, because she gets hungry at night before bedtime. And so it's kind of like we've treated that as her breakfast. She just eats a lot at night. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing, is kind of how I approach it. And so in my experience, there's a lot of high schoolers like that. They're just not hungry in the morning. They don't like to eat, or they don't have time, but still trying to get something, even if it's kind of like an energy bar, Cliff Bar, and like a banana or bagel and a little yogurt cup or Go-Gurt, something like that. That's, you can grab it on the go. You can kind of munch on it throughout the morning if you're on the bus or however you get into school. But that would be first and foremost, is starting in the morning, trying to get calories in, because they may not get another shot to eat again until noon at lunchtime. And if it's anything like my high school days, you got about 15 minutes to eat your lunch before you're on to the next thing. So they don't have a huge window to fuel up at that time. But there, it's again, whatever you can eat in 15 minutes without, hopefully going the fried food and that route. So it could be sandwiches, it could be wraps, it could be leftovers from the night before, whatever the school's having. We're spoiled in my kids' school district. They have a great lunch program, so they have pretty good options for school lunches there. And then the other big opportunity is that post-school / kind of pre-practice window. And that's where, again, you want to kind of have some snacks ready to go that are fairly easy to digest, and, not going to upset the stomach. Sometimes you got to, again, eat fairly quickly, because you might get done with school at 3, practices at 3:30 or 4. So it could be meat, cheese, and crackers and fruit. Could be, again, yogurt, could be string cheese, those trail mix, cereal bars, energy bars, those kinds of things that are fairly portable, grab and go options. That, again, you can kind of eat before or on your way to practice. And then ideally that dinner is probably the best opportunity for a high schooler to really maximize their food intake. And, hopefully that's sitting down and having like a, family meal or a nice cooked meal, balanced meal at home. But I also know sometimes it's you either eat dinner at 4 o'clock or you eat dinner at 7:30 after that practice or game. But ideally, you'd want to get the most out of that meal, and then probably again adding something in before bed to get more calories in before that, 8 hour period where you're sleeping, where you're essentially fasted during that time. So it's tricky, but you really got to be a little bit more strategic and try to maximize every opportunity to get calories in and get, those key nutrients in to keep that process going. I usually explain it to athletes where what you eat today helps you recover from yesterday's workout and gets you ready for tomorrow's workout. And so it's always this continual bi-directional relationship of how food is affecting your body's ability to recover and then kind of optimize training and performance opportunities.
Perfect. And that takes me into my next question. Kind of moving into games, practices, events. Does it, I guess this is kind of a question I got, but does it matter when you eat? Like, are you more or less primed if you eat right before or during a, halftime of a game or practice, versus afterwards? Obviously, we all know afterwards for recovery purposes, but in terms of like performance enhancing, does it matter when and what you eat pre, during, and post event, practice, game?
Yeah, if we start on the pre side of that, I would say there's not a lot of things that you can eat, let's say 2 hours before a game, that can help you a lot. There's things that you could eat that could hurt you a lot. If you go out and eat a pizza right before game time, that's probably going to hurt your performance more than anything, right? That's a fatty meal. It's going to sit in the stomach. It's going to take forever to digest. Those are all things that you don't want leading up to a game or even in intense practice.
So you would
And the
not
reason
recommend Golden Corral?
yeah.
That may or may not have happened on a trip to Texas. Just saying.
And if you are going to have a bigger meal, the biggest thing is just to move it at least 3 hours before game or practice if you can, because that allows you enough time to kind of digest that meal, start absorbing some of those nutrients. But the reason why I said there's a lot you can eat to help is because there's just not enough time. You can't eat something, digest it, absorb it, get it out to muscle tissue or wherever it's going, transport it across cells and store it and have it available to use. That's like a 24-hour process, not an hour and a half kind of process. So you can't necessarily eat a meal and then go take advantage of those nutrients an hour later out on the field or out on the court. So usually my approach is, if you're someone who likes to have a little something in the stomach, go for it. Some people almost get nauseous if they don't eat, fairly frequently. And, for whatever reason, they just like to have even crackers or toast or banana or something in the stomach. Can be helpful for that person before a game or an intense practice. But if you're the other kind of person that already has an upset stomach, don't feel hungry at all, I would never tell that athlete you have to eat, because again, that's the person that will probably respond poorly and have a worse game or practice because they felt pressured to eat something because someone told them to. So beforehand, I really don't, stress a whole lot about it, as long as they've eaten stuff earlier in the day, I should say. You don't want to go into a 3 o'clock practice and you haven't eaten anything yet. That's a recipe for disaster. So certainly getting something in before, but if you've had 2 to 3 meals before the game starts, I'm not really worried about what you did eat, before that kickoff or tip off, as long as your stomach kind of feels settled. And then in terms of what to eat, again, eliminating fried foods, greasy foods, fatty foods, high fiber foods. Those are the kind of major don'ts. in terms of pre-game, pre-practice nutrition, just because those all can lead to, let's just say, GI distress, just meaning you don't feel great. It's not sitting in the stomach well. It's just not going to help you perform better. But otherwise, I usually steer athletes towards comfort foods. You know, what's something that you know sits well in the stomach, fairly easily digestible, and just you feel good after eating it. Like those are things that I would say add in there, and that's going to be different for every person. And then intra game or intra practice fueling, there is some good research supporting like halftime fueling strategies, and there you want to aim for very fast digesting foods slash maybe even just Gatorades, body armors, you know, liquid calories, where you're getting the fluid replenishment, you're getting electrolytes, you're getting easily digestible carbs or sugars that you can take advantage and utilize instantly. So that's a slightly different scenario there, where you can use those nutrients almost immediately because they're so quickly digestible and absorbable. You get them in the bloodstream and they're available to use to kind of help, you know, perform or be active at a high level. So halftime, you know, things that would fit that description again, like the sports drinks, crackers, you know, dried cereal, those kinds of things, just kind of munch on, you know, have in the locker room or available. Yet obviously not eating too much where you're full. And again, we're kind of back to where we were at that pre-nutrition do's and don'ts period. And then, like you said, the post nutrition is probably the most important for kind of jump starting that recovery process. And, you know, we used to kind of refer to it as that 30-minute anabolic window of opportunity, where if you don't eat in 30 minutes, don't even bother. You just wasted your whole day. Where now everyone's kind of changed their approach and now even frame it as like a garage door of opportunity instead of this anabolic window of opportunity, meaning as long as you're getting something in, you know, an hour or two after a game or after practice, you're probably fine. The only time I really emphasize getting that in ASAP after a game is like tournament situations, where if you got 3 or 4 games that day, yeah, I would start refueling as soon as possible so that you can again digest it, absorb the nutrients, have some of that ready to go for game 2 or your night practice. You know, if we're thinking 2-a-days, that kind of situation where nutrient timing will be a little bit more important in those situations because of the quick turnaround before next practice, next game.
Gotcha. So I want to stay on this for one more, because we talked about kind of the athletic games and practices and events. I was one of the guys in high school that lifted at 5:30 a.m. every day, and I'm sure there's millions of people out there that do it now, whether it's high school or college or whatnot. And so I kind of, you've talked about it. Excuse me, you've talked about it already, but fasted state performance versus fed state performance does for the ones that do get up early and work out, it's, you know, you're groggy, it's 5 a.m., you know, whatever. Should you eat before you're working out that early, or, you know, should you not? And does it does it hinder your lift at all if you are going to go to the weight room, or you are going to do some speed stuff that early in the morning? Obviously, you know, after we know that, but you know, it's harder in the morning, obviously, because it's so early and some people wake up feeling differently. But is there any science-based stuff there on eating pre-early morning workouts? Because, you know, it's not like the afternoon where you've hopefully eaten something before then.
If we're talking like a pretty traditional strength workout, I wouldn't be too concerned if you're someone who just doesn't want to eat before then. I don't think it would make a huge difference. If you were to getting into a little bit more of a conditioning type of workout, or if you're someone who's doing like a circuit style, or even more like bodybuilding-esque, where really just high volume, more metabolic kind of conditioning to the style of training, then having food beforehand might help a little bit more, just because it's going to be more kind of fuel dependent for that level of training. But again, if it's a traditional strength workout, I would kind of leave it up to the athlete's preference. If they wanted to consume something, they could, but I don't think it would make a big difference one way or the other, as long as they did get something in right away. That would be the big caveat to that. If you lifted fasted and then you didn't eat anything till lunchtime, you probably just took 1 step forwards, 2 steps backwards in terms of your overall kind of athlete development for that day. So that would not be the ideal situation. So if you're not going to eat beforehand, definitely make up for it after the fact.
Okay, perfect. So we talked a lot about food, and I want to make sure I'm conscious of time here. I do want to get in to a little bit of liquid calories and staying hydrated and things like that. We already touched on it, but can you go into the importance of just general hydration throughout the day? I think, I don't know, Dr. Wright tells me that our generation is getting better at it. Everybody carries around a thermos or a water bottle nowadays, but think of the college, high school athletes again that are stuck in classes in school all day. How much water should they be drinking? And how important is it to, whether it's practice, a lift, a game, keeping them hydrated throughout the day?
Is this where we should ask Stanley Mugs to sponsor the podcast and the nonprofit, because
Yeah,
they
no
brought
kidding.
they brought hydration back for a whole set of people.
Yep.
Yeah, they really have. And I would agree. I think people are more cognizant of fluid and water intake nowadays than even when I was going through school. So I
I
think
don't
it's
know.
probably getting,
We had Nalgene bottles. Those were cool when we were younger.
yeah, that's true. That were putting stickers on your Nalgene. In terms of like a number, probably around like 3 liters a day is a good kind of starting point for, I would say, kind of your typical high school athlete, college athlete. And then that's kind of the starting point. So if now all of a sudden you're adding outdoor workouts to the picture where, as you've already said, you're sweating the second you step out there and could be sweating at a pretty high rate for 2 hours. Normal sweat rate for a football player is probably like half to a liter an hour. So that's could be 2 liters of fluid you're losing during an intense August football practice. So you could just think now we're probably talking 5 liters of fluid intake a day to kind of maintain hydration levels in that kind of situation. And then even if we take it one step further, there's some people that are just the heavier sweaters out there, and you probably know who you are if you're hearing that. Like people who again, they're just existing, they're already sweating, especially when it's hot, humid, they're not in air conditioned buildings. So then their fluid intake might even go up beyond that. So and then the self-monitoring, side of that, if you kind of just pay attention to urine color, it's not a perfect system, but it's better than nothing. And it's something that anyone can do without any equipment. So obviously the darker yellow appearance is probably an indicator that you're on the dehydrated side of things and kind of need to increase fluid intake. And
Especially
then
useful in the morning, just
I was
because you
just going to
haven't
say,
drank. Yeah, sorry to
yep.
get ahead of you, but yeah, super useful in the morning because you haven't drank overnight, and you get a better sense of your overall hydration, not just you slam 20 ounces and now you're peeing clear. It's not same type of hydration.
Yep. Yeah, and that's pretty typical as most athletes again wake up dehydrated. And so again, going back to your morning workout situation, rather than worrying about what you're eating, you may want to focus on what you're drinking to kind of restore hydration levels before going to do that morning workout. And then almost the same thing after the fact. It's kind of replenishing hydration along with our kind of post-workout nutrition that's just as important because if you're sweating in the gym, sweating on the field, that's fluid we need to make sure we're getting back in somehow, whether that's water, sports drinks, flavored water, bubbly water, whatever the fluid of choice is to get that fluid back in.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I just wanted to highlight that, kind of going back to like football. A lot of places will do, especially during fall camp or when it's hot. Pre-weigh-ins, weighing out as well, and that's really looking at hydration. Is everything that we've talked about. What weight you're losing in a practice. You're not losing measurable amounts of lean mass during a football practice or body fat. Like it's not just falling off of you in that practice. It's the hydration. And so that's what we were always looking at. We wanted to see those numbers get back within a certain percentage to make sure that you were not in a constant state of dehydration. And I think the general accepted thing is, leading up to a 2% loss of hydration can lead anywhere from 0 to 10% in the ability to perform. So you're not talking a lot of weight, that can get lost from somebody to have a significant impact on their performance. And that was always something that we harped on. And it's one of those, seemingly simple, easy to say, not always easy to do, but can have a huge impact on your ability to perform. That if you can get that locked in, then you can start looking at some of the other smaller, still important, but smaller impact type of things.
Yeah. And even going back to what we were saying with halftime fueling strategies, I would definitely prioritize rehydration over anything that you're eating from a food standpoint, because maintaining hydration in that second half is going to have a much bigger impact on performance than whether or not you got some crackers or a protein bar in at halftime. Especially for our intermittent kind of field-based sports, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, football could probably, fit in there too, because they're just going to be dependent on cardiac output, meaning how much blood can we pump out to provide oxygen, and stuff like that for performance. And when you lose fluid, you're losing blood volume is kind of where that fluid comes from. So that's why it's important for athletes to maintain fluid and hydration levels to maintain the amount of blood volume they can get out to the body.
So for staying on dehydration, for the coaches, maybe, in high school, it's sometimes parents and people that work corporate jobs, they may not be as into nutrition as much as we are. What are some, if they're not scaling pre and post practice, what are some things they can look for signs of dehydration? And what are some big ones that are like, you need to stop and drink, a lot of water right now, before you get hurt kind of thing. So what are some signs they can look for there to make sure no kids are going off the rails with dehydration?
Kind of going back to what we said, like throughout the day, that urine color monitoring is probably as good as any method that you can use. In terms of other kind of subjective ways to rate that or self-monitor it, if you're starting to feel dizzy, lightheaded, if you stand up and kind of get that fuzzy feeling in the head, that all might be some indicators of dehydration. Joel, you'd probably be better to speak on this than I, but like in terms of more heat exertional related illness concerns, there's some other warning signs that you can look at in those extreme situations where it's a combo of the core temps getting up to such a level, but then also they're dehydrated on top of that. And that's when it can be real dangerous in those conditions. So Joel, I'll let you kind of chime in on that part of it.
Yeah, the big ones looking on that, there was used to be some thoughts on, like, oh, if they're not sweating, like this is something, versus if they're still sweating, then things are okay. And that has kind of been debunked. And it's more looking at, are you visualizing like they're just not performing? Like, not just that they're having a bad day of practice, but things just don't make sense. They're not going where they need to. They're just not performing it in the way that they normally would, any kind of staggering. And then, just looking at recovery positions and different places, which has been hard. I think an interesting one that came out, like people finally debunked the, hands overhead, stand up tall is the best recovery. Like bent over, hands on knees is fine. But paying attention to that, like, is it that, or are they having to go down to one knee in order to get it together? Or do they lay down and, they're having trouble, or is their breathing changing to where it's becoming really rapid and shallow? And all of those. And again, just kind of keeping an eye on them, have they been drinking as much? But anytime you've seen some of those signs, it's just assume something bad's potentially happening and get them in, get them cooled, minimum into a cooled room, maximum get them into a cold tub, because it is something that is 100% survivable if it's recognized and treated. Nobody has to pass away from heat stroke or, all those ones. So those would be some of the major things to take a look at there.
Gotcha. Perfect. That should be really helpful for folks that are coaching or just watching over athletes during the summer. I'm with football and August T. I've learned that my whole life. So for the last couple minutes here, I kind of want to get into some MythBuster stuff for you, for you guys. It might be kind of fun. So one of the things I see a lot is, or at least maybe throughout my career, I've heard, and I've gotten a question on this too, but does it matter taking in protein before or after a lift to get the most gains, so to say? That I've seen some people say if you eat, or you take a shake or a steak right before your workout, it can have the same effect as getting it after. Can you touch at all on the pre and post protein thing in terms of sport performance and I guess lifting performance?
The
Yep.
short answer, just yes, AJ.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Just
say
protein.
they can both offer pretty similar benefits. So if you consumed it before or after, it'll likely yield the same kind of benefits. And then, so second to that, I would just say whatever the athlete prefers. Like, going back to, if people don't feel hungry before, they don't want to take it, then don't force it. Have them consume it afterwards, or vice versa. Sometimes people walk out of a workout and they're like, "Oh, I don't feel hungry at all. Like, if anything, I feel kind of nauseous because it was an intense workout." Then maybe that person should opt for that protein shake an hour before the lift or workout and get it in there. So I wouldn't stress about it and just figure out whatever is most kind of conducive to how the athlete prefers to go about it.
And just get in your protein throughout the day. Make sure you're having it with each meal and snacks, because that aggregate's going to be probably the most impactful to get the goals that you're wanting to do, not 60 grams or 50 or 60 grams before or after. And
Yeah,
you can still have a workout that's successful and not have a protein shake immediately after. That's okay.
100%.
Yeah, that was my next question. So, is there an optimal macronutrient spread that you guys usually offer athletes? And I guess, does that change based on any sort of goals, whether it's putting on or losing weight? Like, is there any magic behind? Like, I know a big one right now is carbs. People are just deleting carbs out of their diet and trying to lose weight that way, or they're doing double carbs to try to put on more weight. Can you talk to that at all? The macro, how you should divide it up depending on what you're trying to do.
Yep. So usually the ratio for most athletes, I would say, is kind of 2 to 1 for carbs to protein. So let's take a post workout shake or something, for example. You would want, let's say, like 80 grams of carbohydrates to 40 grams of protein, or 60 to 30. It's kind of the sweet spot there, because the carbs help replace, the stored carbohydrates or the glycogen that was likely used during that game or intense workout. And then the protein obviously helps to, stimulate muscle recovery. And then the added benefit of combining them is the carbs actually help transport protein into the muscle to kind of better utilize the amino acids and protein. So you kind of get a synergistic benefit when combining those two. But absolutely, they're both going to be very helpful for an athlete. And if you're an athlete who's restricting carbohydrates, you're probably not going to be a well-performing athlete, because they are essential for sport performance for 95% of athletes out there, regardless of sport type. So they should not be restricting them throughout the day. And then usually it's a good idea to kind of pair the two together for like post-workout nutrition.
Perfect. And then I mean, one of the things that's in right now that I've gotten questions on is, is it okay for athletes to take part in any sort of fasting type diets? One of the big one right now is intermittent fasting. Some I see a big one on social media of like 3-day fasts to clear, French fries off your face from when you were 4 years old and stuff like that. Can you speak at all to I guess maybe just a general topic of fasting and sport performance? And I know some of it might be for religious purposes, so there's some people that have to and things like that. So, can you just talk maybe just in general fasting and sport performance? I don't want to get too deep from my question.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of, religious purposes, there would really be zero situations where I would ever recommend fasting or intermittent fasting to an athlete. Maybe a small, minute percent who really want to dive into like the fuel utilization strategies if we look at like high-end runners, but that is by far the exception of that rule. So again, for 90% of athletes, certainly team sport athletes, I would never really recommend fasting for any reason for them. So if anything, you want to go the opposite of that. If you're an athlete, more frequent fueling sessions throughout the day would probably be much more beneficial.
Perfect. And then my last question, you already hit on it, but does it matter when you eat? We got a lot of questions on, is it okay if you already talked about this a little bit, but is it okay if I, dump half my calories at night? Is it okay if I eat, a huge breakfast, assuming there's no practice right after that? And then some people like to do, little meals throughout the day. Does it really matter in terms of sport performance, or is there some sort of method to the madness of optimizing your body?
Yeah, I would say it's not really going to make a huge difference for most athletes. So don't stress too much about when you get your meals in, as long as you're getting them in and kind of hitting your target calorie and macronutrient goals throughout the rest of the day. So beyond that, just whatever fits best with your class schedule, training schedule, work schedule, whatever. That's much more important, is just lessening the stress load on yourself and getting the food in some form or fashion throughout the day will be much more helpful than setting a clock and eating based on when your alarm goes off.
Perfect. Well, I'm running into supplement questions, and I don't want to poke any of those out right now. So that's all I've got.
I think this is a good segue, because if we did talk about supplements, I'd want to just cover everything we just got done covering first, because if you're not hitting those ones, there's no point of even talking supplements, because you're not going to get much out of it if you're deficient in everything else we just got done talking about. So
yeah, maybe we should mark this one as supplementation, so we force people to hear the nutrition side of it first. It's people sometimes, we can talk about it next time, but
episode title: Why you need supplements. Just kidding. Eat first.
Yeah, exactly.
Clickbait. We'll go with that. Well, to wrap up, like we've alluded to, we will talk about supplements and have it kind of connect back and complement all that. That will be on the next edition of this. But thank you both. Appreciate it, AJ, as always, sharing your insight and just making it as simple as it possibly can be in a complex world of nutrition. And Rusty, thank you for the questions, and we'll catch everybody next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Again, thank you for checking out this episode. We truly hope you found it useful. We will be doing a follow-up, really diving deep into supplementation, but as a reference, this is the foundation that you need to start from to then add those in to really get the most out of what you're trying to do when it comes to performance. All the supplementation in the world probably isn't going to make much of a difference if you're not doing a lot of these baseline important things when it comes to nutrition and obviously the performance and training aspect of it. So thank you again for checking it out, taking the time to listen. If you have any questions, please let us know. info@clinicallypress.org is our email. And again, check out clinicallypress.org/shop for a bunch of free resources that we continue to try and add to. We'll do that as long as we can keep coming up with them and finding a way to get it out there. But appreciate everybody listening, and we'll talk